Hi, and welcome to Pellegrino Walk. My name is Kevin Sisti, and thank you for joining me today for, well, this will be the second part in this kind of sub-series that we're doing with my guest today, once again, Steve Montgomery. Thanks for joining us today, Steve.
It's my pleasure, Kevin. I'm glad to be here and talk with you guys and share what we know together.
Well, it's so good to have you, your knowledge, your expertise over the years of studying all this and getting into the details of what we're looking at today that and where it's all come from. So we're going to let you just talk here in a second, but I think one of the main reasons and I wanted to say this before we got started, uh, the main reason we even do these videos is to show people the difference, right, between the holy and the profane, the things that are out
Mm,
there that are just that have crept into the church, right? But
mhm,
in ultimately, we want to elevate Jesus and the Word made flesh that is so diminished today by these
mhm.
men, women, and movements that say he just came as a man. So this is kind of where it all came from. But in the first part, well, in all the parts that we're doing, we're going to be talking about union, channeling, perfection, the great work of theurgy. And man, I'm hearing these words a lot. Union, channeling, perfection, all three of those words from the NAR proper and how it's diffused all over the place. So we kind of left off with Jane Lead, but I think you wanted to start a little bit before that. So feel free to take the floor, Steve.
Okay, Kevin. Yeah, it's a lot of material. And so putting it in context is saying pretty much to me one of the central figures that was later taken up as inspiration for the occult world, for Gnostics and so on, was the second century Gnostic named Valentinus. And so his legacy was sort of passed down through the centuries to various occult societies. And oddly enough, and unfortunately, his influence came into someone who claimed to be a Christian mystic and a prophetess, and that was Jane Lead in the 17th century. So yeah, backing up and some repeat is good because it's frankly kind of a big topic and can be a little bit confusing. But if you're talking about Valentinus's influence, what we're getting into is essentially channeling is one large part of his doctrinal impact and theurgy. So, what is theurgy? That is commanding, communicating with, and in some cases, actually asking spiritual beings uh, to go through your body or inhabit your body for perfection. So yeah, it sounds like a bad Hollywood movie in a way, but this is the land that we walk if we're getting into any analyzation of the occult world and their influence on those who followed in like kind after Jane Lee. So by backing up a little bit, I go to the 14th century and there was a spiritual alchemist named Paracelsus. Okay, what is a spiritual alchemist? Well, if you've seen Disney's Fantasia, where Mickey Mouse is trying to learn from a wizard how to cast spells and so on, I believe that if I remember that movie right, the wizard when Mickey Mouse was so impressed, he was attempting to transform metals into like base metals like steel and iron into gold. That's a traditional thought process that we think of when we get into alchemy. However, when you get into something called spiritual alchemy, the idea is that you're looking for, and these are quotes, a lot of this stuff, actually most of it, uh, I relied on scholars, and so I read plenty of things, but a lot of it came from them. So this is coming from one scholar. He says perfection is to be obtainable through the process of transmutation. Okay, a lot of big words coming away, but this is when earth marries heaven, and this will culminate in the whole creation returning eventually to God. That can go back to way earlier days like Plato, Neoplatonist, and so on. But this idea of, oh, here's another quote from a scholar. He says, heaven impregnates the earth by beings intermediate between matter and spirit, and they will provide the seeker with, quote, revelations from the realm of the spirits through what he frankly calls, as a scholar, he calls it possession. And so I don't even think this fellow was a Christian, but he just analyzed the teachings of Paracelsus. And so now we get to two folks that are very much more directly influential on Jane Lead. And again, I just want to say it over and over so you hear it. Jane Lead, in the 17th century mystic prophetess, she influenced four to five, maybe six of the main prophets of the latter rain. And if you've had your ear to the ground and heard this term before, latter rain is a movement that began in 1948 and in Canada, spread quickly to the United States. And then today you have people in churches like, say, Bethel, people like Bill Hammond, Rick Joyner, who will either openly say they're influenced by the latter rain, or it's pretty much apparent when you look at their teachings.
Hmm.
And then the other thing is to say, not everybody in the latter rain taught all of this kind of stuff, but it was just present. It was circulating around. And I know I'm backtracking quite a bit here, but I realize that one of the things that has to be defined when you're talking about this is a distinction between the latter rain movement and the manifest sons of God ministries or teachings. So, manifest sons of God teachings coming from Romans 8 um, were a big part of the latter rain, but they didn't define all of the latter rain. So you have these people coming out. So what does this mean, manifest sons of God? So they're quoting Romans 8, and what they're looking to say is that before Christ returns, they will be a body of elite overcomers, believers that come into complete perfection. Even you could say, like, this mortal must put on immortality. What was sown in corruption will come incorruptible. So they're claiming that they will be the elite group that comes into this kind of perfection and ultimately brings in the kingdom. Some of them actually literally say that a personal Christ will not return because they will collectively be the Christ.
Hmm.
However, a bunch of them all say the opposite. They'll say, yeah, Christ will return, but it's after we set up the kingdom. So back to the notes I have here.
Hmm.
Um, the 16th century mystic named Jacob Boehme, it was through Paracelsus that he became acquainted with the alchemical tradition, and this pertained to a theurgical-based program of human perfection. Okay, so there's that word theurgical again, and perfection. But Boehm drew ultimately from Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, and Christian Kabbalah, so-called. So there's all these things that are kind of circulating, different versions of what Valentinus injected into occultist teachings. So that leads us then, I can mention this is the 16th century mystic Jacob Boehme was probably the most influential person in Jane Lead's development in her doctrines. Uh, and again, Dr. Jacobs, she put it this way. She said that um, Jane Lead was the pupil who uh, went past the ideas of her teacher being Boehm, even though they didn't live in the same vicinity or the same time period. Boehm was maybe like 150 years prior to her. Okay, so that leads us to somebody who is directly influential with Jane Lead, And she's in the 17th century. We get the 17th century mystic John Portage. Well, he says that he and his wife, Mary, performed what they called angel magic. And they did this in the pursuit of knowledge by theological knowledge by theurgically summoning spirits. Okay, so this is what they're into. And of course, they would call it angels, but we might say something else is going on. Portage's associate, Mr. Cope, said that angels were, quote, the spirits of just men made perfect. I've heard that in the Bible. And he believed that all people have one such spirit watching over them. Oddly, I've heard that kind of thing from the NAR teacher, Cindy Jacobs. She talks about things like that. And you also hear that kind of filtering around in other NAR congregations. And Bill Hammond would also be another so-called prophet that teaches things like this. Okay, just kind of diving in and moving on, and then maybe getting a break from this. And Kevin, what do you want to interject? That would be great. So now we jump forward to the 17th century. And this is what I'm thinking of in my outline here is Jane Lead and onward. And so we'll eventually get to the latter rain and also to the NAR. So here's what Jane Lead said. Bestow upon yourself, oh, sorry, not sorry, but this is what it just was. In the 17th century, she was in England. And so she has kind of a very old-fashioned sort of grammar. Sounds like reading the Constitution or Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, whoever. They've got that old way of speaking. So here's what she says. Bestow yourself as a co-deified life so that Christ above and Christ beneath may join in those who shall personate Christ on the earth. Okay, odd way of saying it, but she believed something that was passed on to the latter rain, that there's literally a corporate Christ above in the spirits of just men made perfect, also termed as the great cloud of witnesses, and those above, and then of course the body of Christ here on earth. She says, and you may have heard this elsewhere too, that they're to join together. And she says this will happen in those that personate Christ. It's not impersonate, like we would use that phrase nowadays, but sort of like representing Christ, or in the sense, sounds like they're almost becoming Christ, which is a pretty good assessment of where she's headed there. Here's another quote. For Christ, before his own distinct and personal appearance, got that one, he will first appear and represent himself in some chosen vessel or vessels anointed to be leaders unto the rest and to bring them into the promised land, which is the new creation state. Now, some of this we may have talked about already, but like I said, it's probably good to review it because it's such bizarre stuff. Now, here's where another big term comes in there, which we do here nowadays. It's the Feast of Tabernacles. And the Lateran uh, writer and prophet George Warnock wrote a book about this, which influenced tons of people in the Lateran movement and even today. So here's what Jane Lead says. At the Feast of Tabernacles, those just and perfect spirits do rise to deify it. Now, in the context of what I read from her writings, and I'm not trying to boast, but I read quite a few of her writings, her prophecies, and so on. When she says deify it, she's referring to what she called the bodily vehicles of essentially elite believers. Bodily vehicles, boy, that sounds like stuff you'd hear in the occult, where like Alice Bailey or Helena Blavatsky, they
Mm-hmm.
really minimize your worth as a human being, and a human being who happens to be a Christian, and you just have a bodily vehicle or a receptacle for essentially possession and being guided to do these things and say these things. So Lead also states that what she calls simplified spirits will be sent to, here's a wacko thing, take up bodies. Okay, again, sounding a bit like possession channeling, which is essentially what it was. And these simplified spirits will be the spirits that will make bodies to become all divine. So there you have that thing going back to the influence of Paracelsus and the spiritual alchemists. Okay, so this will be when spirits of light, man, you got to get your Bible out and think about that. Angels of light, spirits of light, really not much difference in what
Right.
Lead is saying here. She says, when these spirits of light descend into his most holy tabernacle, they will swallow up into himself the body of the sonship. So you can say it sounds a bit vague and okay, what is she getting at here? But if you just focus on main points, which myself as being an ex-classroom teacher, teaching language arts, you focus on, okay, that little detail there doesn't mean too much. If you don't get it, that's all right. What is the main point? The main
Mhm.
point here, she's saying that spirits of light, however you define that, will descend into the tabernacle, which is his body on the earth. And that will be what she calls the body of the sonship. Again, a term that I know I've heard Kevin, you and Barb talk about the issue about sonship.
Mhm. Yeah, we sure do, Steve. There's so many things here. This idea of the corporate Christ above, um, coming down, joining heaven and earth, coming together. This is language that we hear all the time with some of the folks that we've been covering. But what exactly can you nail that down? What do they mean by this? Because we often hear it's called different things, right? The corporate Christ above, the great cloud of witnesses, angels, UFO, I don't know, all the crazy stuff. But that
Yeah,
is going to come and they need, at least according to Jane Lead, and then some of the teachers that you hear today, bodily vehicles to be possessed. That's that's craziness, but that's what they're saying, right?
yeah, it is craziness, and that's what they're saying. And here's what I could tell you: one of the ways that this got into what should be pure Christian teachings and faithful believers. One of the ways this creeped in, other than Jane Lead, was this desire to know, and I know this is a good phrase, but desire to know more of God. Okay, now if you have to be careful with that because if you're saying more than the salvation that God has paid for through the death and
Right.
resurrection of his son, well, then, whoa, that's a slippery slope. And you got to be careful with what you then identify as, quote, more. So, one of the things that helps that, like I said, looking for more and, and the idea, and this is very central, is the idea that the fivefold ministry of which of course includes apostles current day and prophets current day,
Hmm.
they will have, even though they tiptoe around this, the idea of ongoing revelation. We got a fresh word from the Spirit. The Lord told me, boy, you got to be careful when you hear that one. Um, so for again, going back to folks like say Bill Hammond, he is very much acquainted with and kind of regurgitates this stuff about the manifest sons of God. I would say he's very careful because I did uh, some telephone interviews with him, and he didn't try to hold back at all. He kind of laid it out
Hmm.
plain to see for anybody, as if he was proud of these sorts of things. So yeah, wanting more, looking for things to ongoing revelation. These are two real points that you got to be careful with. So that leads us into a section I call here, Jane Lead's Disciples in the Latter Rain Movement of 1948. Okay, so if you put theurgy as the overall context, then the word manifestation may be used to denote deification through virtual angelic incarnation. Okay, so then you have this term literally channeling, and you got to make for what you want of it, but the early the early prophets of the latter rain, the ones I'll be looking at here, they like to use the word New Age. They came into these teachings about the same time as Alice Bailey was writing things like
Hmm.
the spiritual hierarchy and the return of the Christ, etc. And also around the same time as the Gnostic Gospels were discovered, which included writings of Valentinus and other non-canonical teachings by a long shot.
Hmm.
So they all use this word, the ones I'm referring to, they would use words like channeling, and they would talk about the intersection or calling down heaven to earth and then having the merger. So you don't hear this term so much anymore, but it really, really is the same idea. The earlier teachers who taught manifest sons of God doctrines would refer to the quote, many-membered corporate body of Christ.
Hmm.
Okay, so their idea was that, okay, it's not Christ individually. He is being manifested through and will be. The other thing that I stopped myself in mid flow there, but the other thing that's misunderstood sometimes is that whether or not anybody has become a manifest son of God, according to the basic doctrines that they preach. So the term manifest sons of God, that is for people who've actually literally come into perfection. And I've never seen somebody like that. And I'm sure you never have either, Kevin, because it hasn't happened.
No.
And so there's a few literal cults that, even secular folks would look at and say, oh, no, that's a very destructive group, steer clear. And some of those groups would say that their leader had become the first manifest son of God, and they were just following in the trail to make it in. And so, yeah, there's been one I could mention would be John Robert Stevens and the Church of the Living Word, also
Hmm.
called The Walk.
Right.
Excuse me. And so and also another one. This fellow was essentially an underling or a disciple of a fellow, Bill Britton, who we'll talk about shortly. His name was Sam Fife, and oddly enough, he called his cult the Body of Christ. Also, the Move. So we got folks like William Branham is the Message, and Sam Fife it was the Move. So they all had their little catchphrases. Okay, so yeah, this idea of channeling. You also heard words like this was the new order of the latter rain. They would specifically say that, bringing in the new age of the kingdom. So, specifically, this term is used by some of the Manifest Sons of God ministries. And here I'll tell you some names which you may or may not have heard of, but they were able to disseminate this and influence others. One is Royal Cronquist, who happened to be the second-hand man of John Robert Stevens until they split over money issues. That's probably rings a bell.
Hmm.
They got their eyes on the things of this world, in other words. Another fellow was J. Preston Eby, another Bill Britton just mentioned, and also George Houghton. He actually was at the very beginning of the Latter Rain movement in Canada. He was its chief apostle. So, he pulled a lot of weight and influenced a lot of folks. And yeah, at the same time, you had folks like William Branham who were influential over these guys. Then William Branham sort of went his way and made his little cult, or big cult in a way. If anybody's ever seen or heard videos done by John Collins um, at his website about William Branham historical research,
Hmm.
you'll hear a big earful about that, about the influence of William Branham. So you have these fellas being influenced by Jane Lee. Let's go to the first one I mentioned, or the last one I mentioned, very important one, George Houghton. Oh, and this I can say is true about all of these fellows I just mentioned. All of them in their writings, which I happen to read piles and piles and piles of. And in the early days, they'd all have cassette tapes through their ministry, and you could get those. So I listened to a lot of those and took notes. So George Houghton, I communicated with him through letter in the old days. He was influenced by Lead, as these other guys were, and he was Lead's spiritual mentor. Uh, no, I'm sorry. He embraced the teaching of Lead's spiritual mentor, the spiritual alchemist Jacob Boehme, who I recently mentioned. So Houghton outlines how one is made perfect or complete, a manifest Son of God. He states that there is, quote, a great cloud of witnesses who wait for that glorious resurrection, whom both they and us will be made perfect together. Okay, now some folks in those days and even nowadays will scratch their head together. Okay, what does that mean? The same time? No, as you walk through some of these ideas, you'll see that it's back to that theurgical thing. Um, we come into perfection essentially through uh, merging with these guys, these spiritual entities. Uh, excuse me. This will be the resurrection of those sons who wait in the spirit world for the time when they will, quote, join those who still walk the earth, because they, without us, cannot be made perfect. So again, you're going to be hearing things that these fellows really like to mistranslate or misapply words from the book of Hebrews about the great cloud of witnesses, and so this is what they're into. This next fella, J. Preston Eby, I never talked to him directly, but I read lots of his writings. He says that the elite, that's not his word, but I'm just throwing that in to let you know they're the more the chosen group of the church, the overcomers. The elite will have a, quote, glorious union. He puts that in all caps with all the overcoming saints of former ages. It's kind of a suspect phrase there. He spills the beans. He says that they will be joined together as the manifestation of the sons of God. So again, a different definition than people say, oh yeah, we are the manifest sons of God today, or we will become by caring for the spirit. And when the time comes, this will naturally happen as God makes us manifest. No, that's not what J. Preston Eby is saying. And he's saying this under the influence of Jane Lead's teachings. So again, he loves all caps, and then his audience will perk up and say, "Oh, I get it." He says with all caps, "This will be union with the whole body of Christ, those in the heavens, those on earth." He says that they will be, quote, the cloud of celestial spirits which flow through the channel of his body on earth. Okay. This will be the union of heaven and earth, sounds like from the occult world, because through us, the great cloud of witnesses cannot be, oh, I'm sorry, without us, the great cloud of witnesses cannot be made perfect. It is only through us, again, the all caps, that they receive the promise of becoming manifest on earth as the sons of God. With us, they are going to be perfected. Again, so you have this big emphasis on, wait, we're not really talking about the guys here on earth only. Uh, I throw this word around, and hopefully it's a science word, but I think some of you guys would get it. If not, I'll try to define it. Uh, the relationship between the church on earth, the overcomers, those who are being perfected, and the great cloud of witnesses, in this viewpoint, through theurgy, it becomes a symbiotic, not symbolic, but symbiotic relationship, meaning the host needs the the folks that they're going to receive, those in the great cloud of witnesses. You see this in the animal kingdom all the time, where, say, there's a water buffalo, and this little bird perches on its back and gets fleas and whatnot to feed himself. And so they're kind of like it's a give and take. You got something I want, I got something that you want or need. That's the way this is being stated. Then EB kind of lets loose with another round of very questionable ideas where you say, where did he get that? Well, here he goes, all caps. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It will be the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, meaning perfection, the final consummation, excuse me, of the deifying manifestation of the sons of God, meaning those above, through us below, we both get something. For this reason, every saint of God should seek to become the channel of God's collective channeled life. So, Kevin, I'll stop here, but I can't remember if we talked about um, where the idea of channeling collectively. Oh, I know where I was going. Collective channeled life. In the earlier days, a lot of the folks coming after Valentinus, they were kind of in the cult world. They would view God as not the Father in heaven. They would think of God as a collection of, I use the word disaggregate, but meaning like segmented
Mhm.
groups. So, yeah, you've heard this one. Neoplatonism is full of this kind of stuff. Where in Kabbalah also, where you have this series, that's where the word hierarchy. You've got the really high and mighty angelic beings, and then you've got those under and under and under, and then you get to the ones that are intermediate between this. They actually called it the great chain of being. That's occultist. That's not in the Bible, of course, but they called it the great chain of being, so that all of this stuff is connected in their view.
Okay, so what I'm understanding here, especially from this word symbiotic,
Mm,
so obviously we need to come into union, and they need it. The great cloud of witnesses need it as well. So when we're hearing folks in the NAR, and I might pull up some clips.
What happens in the acceptable year? He takes full possession. He's going to take full possession of the people that fully join him at the cross. And guess what? There's going to be massive persecution, reviling, and everything else. How are we going to pass the test? The high priest could only go into the holiest of all once a year.
Yeah.
That's the place of union. That's the place of union. That's the place where he takes full possession. So the Melchizedek priesthood is the priesthood that brings us into union. That is the priesthood of Isaiah 60. They are offering this union that they've entered into. They're offering the bread and wine of Melchizedek. It's coming forth. Will you come into this union with your God? Right? It's Isaiah 40. Stand up on a high mountain and say, behold your God inwardly. Behold him. He's fully possessed us. Will you come into this? There is the offering of the bread and wine. The Levitical can't do that.
His remnant, the ones that are saying yes to full possession of him, will actually remain in that throne room with him. We'll be seated with him in heavenly places. We'll be seated with him. He who overcomes, I'll give him access to sit with me on my throne. That is talking about when Christ's face arises on us, it means he has taken full possession of our identity. We have taken full possession of our identity in the truth of knowing the reality of who he created us to be. There's no separation. That's why we need a Christ awareness, a Christ consciousness, because we have a self-consciousness. Only when the light of Christ shines and arises in the hearts, when he takes full possession and we take full possession of our identity, will the great harvest come in.
I didn't do anything crazy until I heard the voice. I believe the field of dreams you are a part of is to hear a voice, get possessed by the light, expand the light, and then begin to pray and decree.
We need them and they need us, and we're going to be possessed. They talk about it today as though we're going to be possessed with Christ. And even the
mm.
idea of union is being in union with Christ, but yet there's this other side that's talking about angels and the great cloud of witnesses. And now you've got Evie talking about the age of Aquarius. And I don't know if he was
Mm.
around. Was he around, I assume, right at the time of Alice Bailey? I think you said that, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, he was one of those who was influenced by Jane Lead, so that would have been The Prophets of the Latter Rain, 1948, 50, like so in that age, that area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, really interesting. Also, you mentioned New Order of the Latter Rain, and I've never really looked at. I mean, I've heard it before, NOLR, whatever, but it never really connected to this idea of the Age of Aquarius or a New Order. Right now, they're talking about obviously the New Age, but the Christian version of that seems to be New Era. We're talking about a new
Mm,
era coming, which
yeah.
again, the language is all familiar, Steve. Really familiar.
Yeah. And something that comes to my mind as you're saying that is, how do these things spread? Okay, well, ongoing revelation. Sometimes you have somebody who's, quote, under the teachings of somebody, and they go, oh, now it all makes sense, like, say, through the ministry of Bill Hammond. But other times, I kind of relate it to, uh, being a language arts teacher, metaphors were all over the place. And one of my students would always rib with me, and they'd say, what are metaphors for? And I said, oh, brother, not again. And so, but metaphors are used constantly in the occult world so that they had this plausible deniability. They said, oh, no, I
Ah,
never said that. Even if you go back to folks like Valentinus, the early Gnostics, they said, no, 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 we're not really saying that. You're misunderstanding what we're saying. So here's what I say is a metaphor, connective tissue. So what would that mean? Well, if one of these manifest sons of God teachers was using a full-blown doctrinal aspect, and then somebody here on the side who you're not really sure if they're into it yet, but they're tossing out the same words and seem to be related to it in some way, they literally may not be completely under the deception of this, but the doors are open. There's connective tissue. If they believe that one idea, it can later be built upon and gathered in if you start seeing them arriving at the same conferences together, having people come to their pulpit, selling their books. Again, it may not be that they totally understand it, but they're right there. Another metaphor, which is not a really pleasant one for people who've gone through this, but it's what I think of as like gateway drugs, like maybe smoking marijuana,
sure.
which leave you open to others who are addicted to very, very much more dangerous drugs, like say cocaine or heroin or something like that. So the fact that you're hanging out with folks like that are addicted and they're into heavier drugs and you're just getting your foot in the door, your chances of going further into that increase, I don't know how many fold, but quite a bit. So yeah, I think of it as the same way this corruption trickles down this way and that way, above, below, that, and also
Mhm.
laterally. Okay, now again, going back to this, a real scholar, a very well-read person who I was lucky enough to get a hold of, and we talked on the phone, and then did numerous emails. Dr. Bridget Jacobs. So she was especially interesting and well-informed because she was her and her husband were ex NAR folk. So they were
Mhm.
in a church that was totally, saturated with this kind of stuff. They left, and then she became an academic and, wrote about this quite well, understands Jane Lead pretty much in and out. But I have to throw a little thing in there, a little cautionary thing, and I hope I don't sound like I'm bragging. But sometimes she'll say, oh, yeah, Jane Lead, she never said that. And I'm thinking, out of the various things I read, yes, she did. And so sometimes maybe Dr. Jacobs, she knew what she knew and treated it in a very scholarly way, but there was other stuff that she was not quite aware of.
Hmm.
Same thing I would say about Bob DeWay, wonderful man, great faithful Christian and preacher who's written about these sort of things. If you want to look up the roots and fruits of the New Apostolic Reformation, that's online. He was aware of Alice Bailey. He was also aware of Jane Lead. But a lot of folks that are aware of Jane Lead, which is not too many, they usually go to her 60 propositions, which technically She didn't write. That's what Dr. Bridges Jacobs told me. It was a collection of ideas from her writings that some of her followers stuck together, kind of like a manifesto or whatever. So anyway, where I was going with all that was that Dr. Bridges, no, I'm sorry, Dr. Jacobs, I asked her, I said, where in the world did this next fellow, Royal Cronquist, where did he get this stuff? Because it really sounds like an occultist in a large degree. She says, well, to her, he's technically, whatever this means, a Christian Neoplatonist. So if you ever read anything about Neoplatonists like Iamblichus, definitely Theurgy is all over the place and that kind of stuff. So without further ado, here's some of the words that the Royal Cronquist used. And he likes all caps too. He says, they are not, he said this in a state of what he thought was prophetic reverie. And so he put his writings in this category. He called them epistles of the kingdom. So everything he writes is pretty much supposed to be Jesus is talking. So according to Cronquist, Jesus says, there are not enough correctly committed saints pressing for perfection. Interesting.
Mhm.
Then he says, I will therefore have to take out of my cloud of witnesses those spirits of just men made perfect, causing them to descend and receive their glorified bodies. Okay, so there you go. That's the Theurgy. But he makes it even more explicit with this next quote. We, those in the great cloud of witnesses, will take up our abode and tabernacle within you. That
Mhm.
is not Christian doctrine whatsoever. Then he says in the same string, only then will we be glorified. And it's capital W. He's actually referring to the great cloud of witnesses, also capitalized. So essentially, the great cloud of witnesses are speaking through Cronquist. And he, like I said, he was a mover and a shaker in the deep end of the charismatic world. Um, and just bizarre stuff. But he says, those in the cloud of witnesses who wait for the day of their perfection would become fully incarnate and take up their abode to tabernacle within the bodies of the elite on earth. So, kind of a restatement. Then he says, they tell Cronquist that, quote, we will fully incarnate ourselves within their spirits, hearts, souls, minds, and bodies. So that's what he's looking for as the mode of perfection.
Wow. Wow. Fully incarnate. Um, I'm looking
Oh,
through this.
Kevin,
Yeah.
yeah, roll with that, but there's something I forgot to mention.
Okay.
John Robert Stevens, who Royal Cronquist sat under his ministry for a long time, he actually had, even though he's manifest sons of God, he had the writings of the Satanist Aleister Crowley in his library, and also he had Emanuel Swedenborg, the Spiritist, and he also had there was a converted witch, he said, that he got a lot of revelations from. So yeah, there's that aspect of it too. Is and Stevens and Cronquist said this kind of stuff where they'd say, well, you know, the devil has stolen these spiritual truths, and we have to reclaim them. I think you might have heard that one somewhere in the
Hmm.
NAR. Sorry for
Hmm.
interrupting, Kevin.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I appreciate you you adding that on right there. But it's a scary thing as we look forward. And I know sometimes we might I'm speaking for myself, speculate too much on things to come. But man, as we look at this language and we look at what they're actually saying in the NAR about possession, being possessed, um, this idea of the bodies of the elite, and I hear this often, that they expect the elite to rise up, these overcomers, and the idea of being fully incarnated by these beings in the great cloud of witness. Witnesses, there's a couple things that are just completely scary about that. Number one, the fact that you're possessed by this. And then secondly, I wanted to actually ask you this question because there's another word that I'm hearing you say controlled possession. And
Mm.
is there a difference? Like if they're fully incarnating body, mind, soul, and spirit, do they take over, or is this somehow controlled by the individual? Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good one because you get like contradictory statements and understandings about that. One thing that I don't think I've included this in my book because I found out about it later and I just haven't inserted it, was that in these epistles of the kingdom, Cronquist talks about when he first was becoming what he thought was in contact with the great cloud of witnesses. He said that he might be sitting at the dinner table and he'd be carrying on this conversation with one of these so-called angels. And people would stop and look at him and say, you okay? And, oh, yeah, just reaching this new level in the spirit. And so, yeah, that's part of it. And then, what was it that you also said there, Kevin?
Well, this idea of controlled possession,
Yeah,
do they have control of it, or are they taken over completely?
right. Well, you'll hear that in two places in the esoteric world, the occult world. One is in Ruth Montgomery's teachings. She calls these spirits sort of like your spirit guides, and she's totally New Age writer. And she says that she calls them walk-ins. So they can walk in other words, go into your body and either possess you or temporarily possess you or channel ideas and teachings through you. And and also the thing, you hear this directly from Aleister Crowley. And so, yeah, I mean, he's like a notorious Satanist. Everybody,
Hmm.
well, not everybody, but I've heard this phrase again and again. They say, quote, the most notorious evil man on the planet. I don't think so, because even people like Charles Manson, uh, they're blatantly easy to see as satanic and deceived and deceiving. However, if you look at their writings and their thoughts, you say, oh, well, that's not much different than the Neoplatonists to Jane Lead. It's just that they have a coarse and highly corrupt exterior uh, to this sort of idea. So, yeah, Aleister Crowley specifically said that, and he said that in reference to, he actually called it I think he said this in Latin, but he called it the Gnostic Church, I think. And in ceremonies, he would have the high priestess, and she would begin to channel, and she would become, and other people in this religious thing, they would experience what Crowley called control possession, so that they had not completely lost their facility, I mean, their mind and so on.
Hmm.
But at will, this could kind of happen and not happen. When you talk about the ultimate Feast of Tabernacles, the perfection that these fellows in the latter rain and Sons of God teachers, what they're talking about, it doesn't sound like it's got any kind of specific, yeah, it comes and it goes. It's more like this is how it become perfected. In the meantime, of course, through people's understanding of the gift of prophecy, you have sort of temporary experience like this where they're claiming it's the Spirit of Christ who's saying these things. Um, but then, according to Cronquist and others, no, angels can do that. And so when you hear this in the NAR, they say, uh, we will come into closer contact with the angels above, the great cloud of witnesses, and they will be able to come into ministry with us. That's not really far from what we're talking about here. And we get
Okay.
to it later. Bill Hammond, he really sounds like he picked this up directly from Jane Lead, or I don't know, could have been Royal Cronquist. Why do I say that? If anybody's got this proof of this, I'd love to hear it. Cronquist, for all this wacky stuff and this dark stuff he's talking about, he promotes Bill Hammond's book on prophecy, one of his earlier books on the nature of prophecy. And it leads to my question is, did they ever meet up and,
Hmm.
have like mutual influence? I don't know, but the way Bill Hammond, the NAR prophet, talks, it sounds like they could have.
Hmm.
So there's just a couple of other things. Folks that were directly influenced by either Lead or people that were directly influenced by Lead. And I asked you about this guy, David Ebaugh, if you'd heard about him.
Hmm.
David Ebaugh is one of those ones who says, if people say you're a heretic, that's because they don't understand. But we're actually going beyond the gospel. And of course, anybody who knows what Paul said, let them be accursed if anybody comes to you with a different gospel than the one that's been presented. I'm not really sure how that goes past their thinking, but it does. So Ebaugh says this: the spirits of all the people who have died and gone on before depend on our joint perfection. Wow, see, that's that
Hmm.
connected thing, symbiotic. And then he quotes, from Romans. He says, "All of creation groans, waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God." That's what brings all creation into perfection, even the cloud of witnesses that surrounds us. They are waiting because it's going to bring them into perfection as well. What I did talk to him on the phone, and Ebaugh, who took ongoing revelation into anti-Semitic thought, and in other words, he was a Jew hater. He also referenced the Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic teachings, and had several things to say about that. One thing that comes to mind is he says, isn't it strange that God revealed these truths to Jewish people, meaning Kabbalah, when it first came out, those teachings were essentially to like Jewish mystics, and then it
Hmm.
later came to be Christian Kabbalah. So, for whatever that's worth. So, Bill Britton, I talked to his daughter and read tons of his writings. He references Jane Lee. Um, and also, I talked to, let me see, three people in ministry with him. Two of them were associate pastors, and one was essentially like uh, the librarian, the clerk that would sell you Bill Britton's writings and so on. So yeah, it's really clear that he's influenced by Jane Lee. Here's what he says: God is preparing the channel, which is his body in the earth. Then a lot of these ideas, they use those metaphors again, or they expand upon something in Scripture. So Britton said, Jacob's ladder, we know that's in Scripture. He says it's like the bridge of transport from earth to heaven and heaven to earth. This bridge will be the means of heaven and earth being joined as one. Now, I tell you where, you have to kind of know his little tricks and what he says. He has in his writings this thing. He says, who is heaven? Oh, that's a strange question. He says heaven is the believers in the spiritual realm. So he doesn't really have it as a location, a state of being, reward for following Christ. No, he says it more like what Neoplatonists and these other occultists would say, and what Jane Lead would say, is that it's uh, a group of people or spirits. That is what heaven is. Okay, then he says this. He says, those in the cloud of witnesses will be coming back for their resurrection bodies. Sounds like Cronquist. Then he says, God's kingdom exists in heaven in the lives of just men who shall be perfected and put on display in this earth. It is they who, without us, they should not be made, all caps, made perfect. So again, it's these little hints, and you have to kind of know in context. That's how actually all religious cults that have nothing to do with this function in what maybe some of your listeners would know what they call loaded language, where
Hmm.
you throw, yeah, you know what I'm saying. you throw out a phrase, and the people who are just stepping into this stuff say, huh, that's interesting, never heard that one. The people who are in the know, they don't have to hear it being stated explicitly and explained over and over and over, because it's, oh, yeah, I get it, just man, okay, that's the cloud of witnesses, so on and so on. Now, if anybody has the time or inclination, you can get this from my book, but you could probably save some time reading through all the material. But there's this ministry online. It's called Terry and Tyche Crisp
Hmm.
Good Seed Publications. And so, first off, it's interesting that they praise the latter rain prophets, George Warner, Bill Hammond, I'm sorry, Bill Britton, and George Houghton. And here's what they say about them. They say that because of their emphasis on those who have died in the faith and joined the great cloud of witnesses, who without us and our bodies cannot be made perfect, sonship teachers have often been accused of of teaching communication with the dead and unintentionally leading support for spiritism. Yeah, excuse me, duh. Of course, that's what it sounds like. Now, not to belabor it quite a bit, but it happens that the CRISP, this husband and wife team, excuse me, they're really well read. They list all the criminal lineup of New Age teachers, and this one says this, and this one says this. But they also mention the Gnostics, and they teach it fairly accurately what Valentinus said. And this is what they tell us. They say that within each spirit is the desire to reunify with its counterpoint and become whole again. That could easily be been said by Aleister Crowley, the Satanist.
Hmm.
But as we see, it's also, said by Jane Lead and the other folks that have been influenced by her.
Yeah, it's funny. I followed them on Facebook, Terry and Tyche Crisp. So
Uh,
they have some interesting things that they say often. And I believe they've
mhm,
made some comments on the Mirror Bible translation
huh,
Facebook group as well, which is not surprising because that's getting into really Bethel Church and some of these other groups.
mm,
But really, really interesting stuff. I've been looking at Bill Britton lately because, and you've just mentioned him. We did a video on Constance Cumbey and Bill
mhm.
Britton, and I was wondering how do we find what the document that Constance Cumbey was talking about? I believe that she had in her briefcase that I haven't been able to
Yeah,
locate yet, but you bring up Bill Britton, and wow, just really some extreme stuff there that looked a lot like the New Age.
yeah. He was very influential, and he was one of those guys. He wouldn't show up. Excuse me. He wouldn't show up on the 700 Club. Some of these other guys would, like Earl Polk and so on, the
Hmm.
Jimenezes, Ann and John. Um, but he had a pamphlet which I think he wrote called "The Prophet on Wheels." So he's not ashamed to call himself a prophet. And basically, it's say that he was kind of like behind the scenes, uh, spreading this corrupt teaching. He's also another one who I think is slippery enough that you have to be patient with him, and he sets up an idea gradually, gradually, and then, like he said, he says that heaven is the believers that are in the spiritual realm. But as far as the paper you're referring to, that was um, the Neo-Pentecostals and their amazing New Age teachings.
Hmm.
This was written by Ernest Ramsey,
Right.
and I try to not step on toes, and I just say, well, my memory goes back to this quite a long time, like 1985 when I first saw that one. To my best memory, I became aware of that through a New Age fellow, ex-New Age fellow named Hugh McCauley. And so Hugh said, "Hey, Steve, I see that you're looking into Bill Britton and all this stuff. Have you ever heard of this document?" I said, "No, can you send me a copy?" So he sent one to me, and the best of my knowledge, I think I shared that with Constance, although she might have found it independently. I really am not sure.
Hmm.
But Constance and I had, well, the easiest way of like the give and take, I hate to reuse that word, symbiotic relation, is Constance introduced me to a lot of New Age teachers who I was not aware of. So,
Hmm.
like David Spangler and Benjamin Creme,
Hmm.
folks like that. And also some of the ideas coming from Barbara Marx Hubbard and Ruth Montgomery. And then one of the real sources of all this stuff was Alice Bailey. So I said, okay, I really don't take people at their word, even though I might trust them in other matters. So this puts my workload to a higher level where I had to read piles of Alice Bailey
Hmm.
and said, oh, yeah, I see where that's coming from. The significance, whoever found it, and spread it of this neo-Pentecostal thing, the significance of it is this, is that the author was totally an Alice Bailey advocate.
Hmm.
He says that there are three centers of this neo-Pentecostalism, which is essentially manifest sons of God. And he said one of them is in Springfield, Missouri. Oh, okay, that's Bill Britton. And he made it very clear because he then promoted one of Britton's writings called, all right, I'm going to get this wrong. I don't have it right in front of me, but there's a couple of books that Britton had authored that Ramsey was promoting. That's strange. And then he promoted the Feast of Tabernacles by Warner. And so why is that significant is that Ramsey um, advised those who are Alice Bailey followers. He said, these guys over here, they're actually in the same camp as us. It's just that they get this stuff through a more spiritual reading of scripture, like symbolically. I don't know, this is a side issue, but maybe Kevin, you've heard of the early church father Origen.
Hmm.
He was ridiculed in some ways because he did loads and loads of symbolic teachings, to where sometimes it's a little bit questionable of where he stands.
Sure.
Well, when you get to, oh, and then he mentioned, Ernest Ramsey mentioned, he said that there was a spiritual center for these teachings in upstate New York, and he's referring to Pinecrest. Okay, Pinecrest was a Bible institute begun by Bill Britton and Wade Taylor. So again, you have this undercurrent of all this stuff is coming back at you. Um, so yeah, that one, I unfortunately, somebody else asked me about that one. I sent, for a while, I took a big sabbatical on all this stuff, and I sent my materials to a fellow researcher and asked him, I said, later, like more recently, I said, do you still have a copy of that? Can you send it to me? They looked for it. They couldn't find it either.
Oh,
So it may turn up in my folders here,
okay.
but excuse me, I definitely don't have it in digital form. So what I did was I just took notes off of it and, you know, went like that.
Well, it's really interesting, Steve. And I guess we should wrap up this episode. But I've been wondering because I couldn't find what the New York location was. So there were three locations. One was Virginia Beach with
Right.
Jimenez, and one was Springfield
Yep.
with Britton. The other one you were saying Pinecrest with Bill Britton. And who was the other individual?
That was Wade Taylor.
Ray Taylor. Okay.
Wade, Wade. And he was just one of those latter-rain advocates who became acquainted with Bill Britton, and spread some of the stuff.
Very interesting.
There's something in my book about that where there's another guy, Roland Pleats. Roland was associated with that, but much more recently. He wasn't back in the 1940s. And he taught a lot of this stuff we're talking about. This is maybe just a teaser, if you will, or just a preview, is that the crisp and quite a few, like George Houghton, Jane Lead, and some others. They feel like the ultimate destination of the message of sonship and manifestation of the sons of God will end up in universalism, meaning all shall be saved.
Right.
And I talked about that with Dr. Jacobs. And her opinion on this, which I agree with, is that they kind of are talking about it through two sides of their mouth at the same time. One, people will, yes, be eliminated, but they're not like out of the possibility of becoming perfected as Christians. They can be sent off to some, sometimes it sounds like purgatory, some realm of the spirit. And then later, of course, this is all unverifiable because once they're killed, they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
But later they would come back as individuals to perfect the body of Christ. So it's like this revolving door.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we kill them because that's what, we got to cleanse the kingdom. Judgment starts at the house of God. And then you've got these guys waiting to become incarnate again. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you hear that through the crisp, and I have a pretty detailed take on that we can get into in one of the next videos.
Oh, that'd be great. So yeah, it's interesting because they're doing us a favor by purging us, right? That's what it sounds like. It's an amazing twist. But once again, thank you for going through all this material, and we'll pick it up again in the next episode, and certainly talk about much more. But what an interesting topic that we're talking about, this idea of really possession or theurgy, and we're seeing this right in front of us, folks. We're seeing it right in the church, and in various ways and spectrums, so to speak. So thank you once again, brother, for sharing with us today, and God bless you and your ministry. And um, if you want to just take a second, talk about your book, tell people
Oh,
how they can get
okay.
it. We'll put the link in the description as usual, but if you want to go ahead and do
Okay.
that.
Well, my larger book, which I think is like 460 pages. Oh, don't freak out. But one of my buddies who does research says, Steve, don't you want to cut that into pieces, like have several books? I thought, well, no, what I want to do is have it like a handbook where you can look up this person, this movement, that movement. And what I do then is I apologize for it in the beginning is that this is going to come across slightly repetitive because what I do is I go through from everything from Valentinus all up to fairly much present day NAR folk.
Mhm.
And I put them through a filter, which I don't think it's arbitrary, but I found what I think are 10 main themes of apostasy. And so, yeah, some of them have to do with this overemphasis on angels. Some of it's on what I call the sacred purge or the need to cleanse the kingdom before Christ can return.
Mhm.
And tons of it has to do with this almost universal false teaching that basically you can become as gods. Like, we've heard this from Genesis on through forever. And so that book is called The Converging Apostasy, and it's available in Amazon. The other one I have, which I almost have to look at the title because John John Collins, when he makes reference to this one, he says, let me try that again. Okay,
It's
so
a
anyway,
quick
this one's much,
outline or
much
something.
shorter. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so I came up with a term and I ran it by Dr. Jacobs, and she goes, yeah, that's spot on. Okay, so I'll go with it. So I call this one a quick outline of hands-on eschatology, meaning I'm in control. We don't really need your help, Jesus,
Hmm.
angels, God. No, we got this, and you told us we could do this, so we're going to do it. And so hands-on eschatology, meaning the end times are within our command. Then I put a colon and I said, this is a matter of timing before Christ can return, in other words. and agency, meaning through, you know, us humans brought here on Earth. So that one only goes through three of my themes. It goes through perfection, yep, dominion and rulership. Yeah, we hear plenty of dominion, and also purge. And so it also does something which I don't know if that's a good way to do it, but I went with it. Is I don't have like that came from such and such book, 1942, published by yada yada. So I don't really do that. I just quote directly either from scholars or from the primary sources of these folks. And so it's a greatly reduced thing, and it's I think like 67 pages, something like that. So if it's helpful as an introduction, great. But yeah, either one of those is available at Amazon.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, and I'll just encourage the viewers. Um, I have both of those, and as I got the Converging Apostasy first, and it was like 900 pages or so. I don't know. On the Kindle that I have, it showed like 500,000 pages. But at any rate,
Oh
um,
no.
yeah. So, but I got the quick outline as well. And the outline really helped along with the book as well. And now, of course, I use your book as a reference often, just go back and
Great.
familiarize myself with the themes. So, yes, thank you again, brother. We'll have the link in the description for the books, and we will see you next week. God bless you. Thank you for speaking to us today.
Thank you, Kevin, and say hi to Barb.
I will do. God bless you.
Okay.
Thanks for watching.
You too.